Hola, and welcome to Vive Nutrition Radio, the first ever Spanglish podcast where you will hear interviews with the top minds in nutrition, performance, fitness, and health in both English and Spanish. Here is your host, expert registered dietitian, Andres Ayesta, on a mission to help you take your nutrition to the next level. Hope you're ready for this. Let's dive right in.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Vive Nutrition Radio. I actually missed another episode last week. I'm going to be honest with you guys. It's been where the company is going through a lot of changes right now. Good changes, good positive things. We're in the process of hiring a customer relations manager. We're also, we just hired our first dietitian. So it's all good growth and good things. But of course, a lot of times, like the content took a kind of step back, specifically the podcast. So I wanted to, I was having a conversation with my fiance and I was like, I think I'm going to stop the podcast. But then I said, you know what, I can't do that because even if I'm posting and I'm bringing an episode to you guys every 2 weeks or so, I think it's still more valuable than bringing you nothing at all. And I think there's a lot of things that we can always say, but it really helps me to hear from you. So our listeners to figure out, okay, what kinds of content can we bring to you guys that could be valuable and that can definitely help you in one way, shape, or form to help in your nutrition process at all. So anyways, I wanted to kind of give you some overview of what's been going on. But hey, thank you again for listening in. Today is, by the time this is releasing, it's going to be February 25th. It's Tuesday, and I competed this weekend, guys, and it was a phenomenal time. I'm not sure if you guys know this, but I am I train CrossFit. That's kind of like what I have been doing for the past few years. I love it because it's the kind of thing that kind of gets my mind off of everything in life when I'm doing a workout with like that, because it's just essentially I'm just gassed and I'm not thinking of anything else. And I like to kind of push myself through specific limits, and I think that really helps me accomplish that. So I've been doing it for a few years, and then recently one of my shout out to my peeps at CrossFit, Big Guava, they here in Tampa, Florida, they not challenged me, but they asked me, hey, or they just started asking in the Facebook group, would anybody be willing to take a spot in a scale team, which is like the step down version of what they call intermediate and RX teams, which is obviously more weight and heavier loads as far as like the type of workouts that they do. And they asked like if there's another team that wanted to join. So I said, you know what, I'll do it if I can find people that can do it with me. So we decided to sign up. We went in, we competed. It was an amazing experience. We actually got 24th out of 140 teams. So I don't think that was too bad. At least we were not last. So certainly something that it was something outside of my comfort zone, like literally, and then being and sharing the same stage, competing, at the level that I'm at, but at the same time, like literally stepping off the stage and then seeing people like Noah Olsen and Tia Claire Toomey and all these like game athletes that are worldwide known for like their fitness and CrossFit game competitors and things like that. It was actually a pretty remarkable and cool experience too. And definitely shout out to the people from Wadapalooza for putting such an amazing event together. But anyways, that's kind of like what was up to this weekend. That's maybe another reason why I'm recording this podcast last minute. But I wanted to, besides sharing that, I'll talk about this and some of the things that I learned, obviously, throughout this weekend, and maybe in an alternative podcast. But I think I also wanted to, because I want to do more CrossFit-specific podcasts, because I think like there's a lot of need for people in this area. Like being there allowed me to realize how big that is in the world. Like there were people from like South America competing. There were people from like coming from like England and all bunch of different countries like competing just for this sanctioned event. So it was honestly awesome to be able to see that. So it definitely is an area within nutrition that I feel like can be exploited a lot more, and there's not a lot of registered dietitians actually involved with it. So I want to make sure that I get myself out there a little bit more, and I think there's going to be some great things coming up soon. As we get into this process. But anyways, thank you again for tuning in to another Review Nutrition podcast episode. Today we're going to be talking about dairy because I went, coincidentally speaking, like last week I went to a dairy farm actually. So it was a very interesting experience. Today's topic is very controversial, and I would ask you politely if you have very strong views on the dairy industry, sustainability, farming, cows, and all those different things. If you have very strong views against it, I'm going to share like very objectively my views on what I saw during this like farm tour. I'm going to tell you who I visited, how I did it, who it was through, and everything going to be full disclosure, because I want to kind of give you the reality of some of the things that I learned during this entire tour. Because I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions. And I'm also going to give you some really interesting resources so you can learn more about dairy, because I feel like it's a pretty hot topic. In fact, tomorrow's infographic is going to come to you through, it's going to be kind of like explaining a few different things on my Instagram of the different kind of sources of dairy and how to get different things and so forth. So anyways, yeah, so that's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we get into the full episode, I think it's important for you guys to understand a few different changes coming up to our VV Nutrition Coaching platform. So we're super excited. First of all, I want you to get excited for a very specific and secret project coming up for the end of the year. This is going to be, and I think this is the first place I'm ever actually saying it's going to be a live event. That's all I'm going to say right now. But if you're listening to this podcast and you live in Michigan, or you live in Atlanta, or you live in Miami, like this may be an opportunity for you to be a part of something that has never done before. And I think it's going to be a really interesting and exciting time for us to be able to bring us together in the spirit of common health and really in the pursuit of fitness and nutrition and learning and education. So I'm excited for that project that I'm going to be working on the next few months. And at the same time, I wanted to invite you. We have opened up enrollment for our nutrition coaching program and our nutrition coaching method. Our dietitian, Dana Wallace, she has been actively taking on new clients as part of our View Nutrition coaching platform. And we're super excited because she's an amazing person. I'm actually going to bring her on the podcast so she can share her experiences and she can share some of her knowledge with us, because I think it's going to be super cool for you to be able to kind of get to know her a little bit more. But anyways, I think that was a long introduction, so let's get right into the podcast today and today's episode. So let's talk about the dairy industry. So first off, like the first question that most people always ask is going to be, do we need dairy in our life? Like, it's that because since we're kids, I remember probably you do the same thing that, mom and dad and everybody, we are, we're told like, milk, you need to drink milk since you're a kid, to grow stronger bones and to make sure that you're healthy and to get enough protein, all these different things. In fact, we start, taking milk since we are, as soon as we're born. Obviously, if we are breastfed or if we're given formula, it has a formulation that is very similar to human milk. This is an interesting thing too. I don't know if I ever told you this, but I used to work for Mead Johnson Nutrition, which is I was a laboratory technician for them, and I worked a lot in the research and development department, trying to understand human milk and human milk proteins and how they can impact specific areas on. I worked with specific certain proteins that in some cases can be helpful for immunity in babies. So it was a really interesting time because essentially what we're trying to do is trying to mimic as best as possible human milk. So and when formulas that we give to babies. But obviously leads to the question, do we need to drink dairy? Do we need to consume dairy since we are little, or do we need to consume dairy as adults to be able to get a full, well-rounded diet? The answer is no. It is not a requirement, but it is a very nutritious food. It does contain a lot of nutrients, from micronutrients to macronutrients, vitamins, minerals, proteins, specific, well, especially when you're a baby, like literally when you're being breastfed, that milk contains specific what we call that immune agents that can help strengthen your immune system as you're a baby. Like there's so many different positives of dairy and human and cow's milk, specifically cow's milk. Again, I'm not talking about human milk anymore, that have many positive benefits. The thing is, like, the dairy industry has undergone a lot of scrutiny because, again, you can actually maybe hit it in different areas. From one side, we have like the activists and plant-based, like, proponents that are saying, obviously, the sustainability of farming. And I'm going to talk very briefly about that today. Then there's another group, obviously, talking about like the ethical considerations when it comes down to cows and the mistreatments of them in dairy farms. I'm going to be talking about that today. And then also about specific documentaries that kind of depict some of like the ethical considerations and ethical concerns within the dairy industry, aka the Very Fair Life documentary. And in my conversations that I had with literally a farmer who owns and has owned for generations a farm that grows or that has dairy and continues to do so here in the state of Florida. So I think it was like really eye-opening. And again, like you may still have strong opinions and strong views of that as far as this. I just wanted to record this podcast to give you like the broad overview of what I learned, what I know, and hopefully give you an extra couple of facts that maybe you didn't have before you listen to this podcast. So I wanted to kind of go over that. But yeah, so back to the just to make sure that we kind of tie that up, like dairy is not absolutely necessary because you can get a lot of those nutrients from other sources, but it is a very convenient and easy way to get a really full broad spectrum of nutrients, specifically for somebody that is growing, somebody that is just starting. That's why it's recommended for babies and for growing childs and teens and so forth, as a good source, as an excellent source of protein, calcium, vitamins, and minerals, as I mentioned. Now, what is in dairy? Dairy obviously is, or let's talk about the farming industry and understand some of the biggest misconceptions and some of like the typical, we're just going to call it the typical, again, I guess I would just call it misconceptions that exist around like the dairy farm. So I'm going to tell you exactly where I went. So I'm going to tell you a story and some of the things that, so I can kind of walk you through the story and some of the questions that I ask. I think he's Mr. RUCKS. This is the RUCKS family, essentially. It's a farm down in Okeechobee, Florida, about 2 hours south of Tampa, towards Miami. So we went. It's an amazing place. Their farm, I think it's closer to, I don't even know how many acres this land is. But I'm going to tell you that it was awesome to be able to see the way that their operation, it was awesome to understand what goes on there, and ask a lot of questions. Like literally the owner of the farm was the person doing the tour and teaching us everything about their farming practices, the way that they treat their cows, the way that they do stuff with their cows. And I was able to ask a lot of questions and literally seeing it firsthand, the way that they actually do dairy or they do milking with some of these cows as far as that. So I didn't write some things, but I wanted to still share some of the typical misconceptions that I have experienced or that I kind of got to live through that. So again, we got to this place and the first thing we went to, and they kind of took us on a tour to to learn more a little bit about their feeding. So essentially what they feed cows. So one of the biggest things that I really got away from like this entire tour is cows are like also like, think about cows and their milk as kind of like moms and the milk that they give their babies. Now, of course, this is a little bit different because this is milk that is coming from a cow to feed humans. So it's obviously different. And again, this is where activists and plant-based like proponents and people against the dairy industry are going to say that's just not the way that, life should work. Now, the thing about it is that, with cows and there's a lot of this from the sustainability aspect of things. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that too. But the thing about it is that, again, the biggest misconception that exists is how, for example, how these cows are treated and essentially how they live. One part of it that I realized when I went to this farm is like, first of all, cows are not really kind of staying in this, like, it's a little cubicle where they cannot even move. That is actually far from the truth. In fact, what they do is like they have them in this, like what they're calling freestall barns. Again, this is at least for like this specific farm, which are basically designed for the cow's comfort. Like it's very hot and humid here in Florida, and a lot of times like this climate, these barns can really help them keep comfortable. They have a ton of fans for them in all their stalls. They have access to like fresh feed and water at all times. So these are cows that are just moving around. They're not confined in a specific really small place or a specific little small like cubicle where they cannot even move. That's actually far from the truth. It's actually a pretty clean place. I could see it firsthand, and they keep it that way because they just try to make sure that they're making it fit for cows to be able to roam and stay in there and, basically just stay and with other cows and the way they kind of describe it and have the freedom to socialize, to eat, to drink, just to sleep, whatever they decide to do throughout the entire day. So, and I could see some of like these freestall barns being installed in there. They're trying to even grow them a little bit bigger. So the way that they do their operations is essentially they have obviously these cows and they milk their cows, and a lot of times like they inseminate them. So they do artificial insemination. Yes, they do that. But as I mentioned, and one of the things that the people that are plant-based eaters, the way they're kind of like talking about it is like they're raping cows, and that's a pretty dramatic term. And the way that they're doing it is not necessarily like that. And they kind of walked us through the process of really what that entails. Cows are only supposed to be inseminated when they are in heat. So when they're in heat, these cows are going crazy trying to find who can mate them. The only thing is there's not a bull for that to happen. And so instead of doing that, they basically do artificial insemination. This is not a painful process. It's just simply making sure that they can fertilize or, the egg of the cow to make sure that they're having little calves. So those are like the main thing. And they usually do this like 2 to 3 times a year. And they have 3 months in which they're not really doing any kind of like, artificial insemination. So they call it like, the 3 months of like basically they're in vacation. They don't milk them. They're just kind of hanging around. They're doing nothing at all. And that's kind of like the way that the cycle of these cows actually go through. So that's part of it, like the process of in which like, they kind of like operate a dairy farm. Usually once like and so you can kind of have an idea of like the way the cows are kind of handled. Like they're also once like basically they get pregnant and they're gonna have their calves, which I don't remember exactly how long it takes, like from the moment that they inseminate them until the moment that they have their calves. But they move them into another barn in which they're also separated, but they're in there chilling, not doing anything at all. They're obviously not milking. They're not doing nothing like this, and all they're doing is just chilling until obviously their baby calves come. Now they separate the calves from the cows, but this is the other part again where activists usually are, or people in like the vegan and plant-based communities are usually kind of like exaggerating certain things because they're saying they're separating these like calves from their cows. And this is a conversation I was having with my fiance, and you can see like literally their calves are not really that much separated. You could probably, like some people would definitely argue against this, but they're putting in a barn right across from where these cows are, like about like 10, like 20, 30 feet away from each other. Now, one thing that he was actually talking, the farmer, which he's been doing this since he was born pretty much, he was just saying that a lot of times when cows like give and give birth to their calves, like they're not like, for example, dogs that are like really wanting to be with their little puppies and things like that. It doesn't really happen in the same way with cows. They usually are very disassociated from their calves, so they don't really necessarily have, like, usually once they give birth, they just go to their plates, they go back to eat, they go back to rest. It's like you can, the way he described it is like they sense things, but there's the emotional part of it. They just, at least like what he sees, is not really fully there. So that's the part of it that us humans will never understand. Let's just basically put it that way. But that's something interesting that we really learn from that perspective. The other thing about it too is, and I think one of the biggest questions is like, what happens with the use of antibiotics, and really what is like the reason for using that. So milk in the United States, it is antibiotic free. So here's the thing. Cows, like humans, get sick. Like a lot of times, because like there's like animals, like these are cows that are living in farm environments, and a lot of times there could be a bird or something like that brings a disease or brings a flu or something like that, and then they give it to a cow. And cow, just like humans, get sick and need to be treated, just like humans need to be treated with antibiotics, and usually to keep like the welfare of the cow. And whenever that's not done, usually the life expectancy of cows actually start to come down. So that's one of the reasons why sometimes like they're treated with antibiotics. The thing is, what people don't understand is like a course of antibiotics, those cows are usually put outside of, they're not being milked. So these are cows that are kind of putting into a quarantine. They're basically being treated. And then after that, they usually kind of have a specific time point or time frame before they can actually be milked again, for actually getting the milk that it goes into, or that goes into stores. So again, like antibiotics are not something that is present in the milk that you're drinking, but cows need to be treated for antibiotics. Otherwise, they die. Like if you have an infection and you don't treat yourself with antibiotics, you are not going to make it. That's just a simple, plain reality. Like before the invention of penicillin, like humans were dying by simple, stupid, like infections, like simple things that right now are treated with like, going to a quick urgent care and taking care of it. Like, or even like stuff like it contains antibiotics those kinds of things that a lot of times that people don't understand. So cows, like humans, need to be treated for diseases and stuff like that. And there are veterinarians and animal I just call them animal doctors that are taking care of this entire process. There's just a way that they can ensure the cows actually maintain their welfare and that they're living in a nice environment. So that's a part of it that a lot of times like people don't really understand too much, and that's part of the process of that again, like as far as like antibiotics are concerned, it's something that sometimes like is misleading. So a question that we ask that is a typical thing is like the use of growth hormone or rBST, which rBST is the way that they kind of described it. It told me it's a man-made version of a naturally occurring growth hormone, BST, which is found in dairy cows. Now, it's a hormone that only affects cows, is not found in or becomes active in human. Now, when properly used by dairy farmers, it can increase milk production by 10% and keep cows healthier by ensuring that they're metabolically active. Now, unfortunately, what they mention is like the movement against using rBST was started when the dairy industry did not communicate the safety and benefits of these products in a timely and proper way for the consumer. I'm literally reading this off from some of like their sites. So of course, like there was a lot of fear mongering around like, the treatment of cows with growth hormone, and this perception of us obviously created. But the reality is that whenever BST is actually used in dairy cows, they can actually produce the same amount of milk with 6% less land use and 10% fewer cows, and therefore upsetting the carbon footprint of a gallon of milk by 8% less than it is today. So again, according to FDA, World Health Organization, and NIH, like milk from cows treated with rBST are actually safe to consume. And again, like there's a lot of misconception around like that this being unsafe remains. Like it's a pretty strong thing amongst consumers, but that's just something that a lot of times like they really wanted me to understand as far as like that process. So it was really interesting to see how farmers are they are the front line of this. They know this information because they're the ones that are treating these cows with that. But the key thing from like this the RUCKS family being in their farm is like they just want to make sure that they give their cows a happy life, like that they're actually okay. They were telling me like the way that they actually maintain their cows in this freestall barn environments and these kinds of things like that, they're reducing reducing like their death toll by, you know, I think like a normal, sometimes in dairy farms is up to like 20% to like down to, I don't remember exactly the numbers, but if cows were allowed to be roaming free in the hot, humid environment of Florida, for example, like 20% of cows will die in the first year. So essentially what they're doing is trying to give them more longevity. Now you're probably going to say, well, you're giving them longevity so you can keep milking the crap out of these cows. In reality, it's a concept of obviously maintaining ecosystems, and that's a part of it too that sometimes like people don't necessarily understand. It's also an industry, and it's something that keeps the economy flowing. But I'm not gonna get too much into the politics of that. I wanted to actually make a small parenthesis and really answering how are cows milked, because it's another misconception. In many, like a lot of times in like documentaries and things like that, you see like this milk, these cows are plugged into these machines, and the perception, and honestly the way I thought it actually went is like these machines are being plugged into these cows like 24/7, or they're plugged in for hours at a time. They're milking them nonstop. The reality of that is completely different. Like cows are milked only twice a day through a machine. Yes. Now each milking takes only anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes, out of which 3 to 4 minutes is really of that the milk machine is actually on, and they're pulling in a way that is like so gentle that it's actually even more safer than using human hands, preventing potential bacteria from spreading from cow to cow, which is also something that helps in the process of making sure that the milk that you're consuming is actually pretty safe. So again, they are from like 5 to 10 minutes at a time, twice a day, and then they just go back into their, you know, freestall barn to chill, whatever may be the case, but they're not necessarily being put on a machine nonstop for 24 hours a day. And again, we always talked about the fact that they do have 3 months in which they're not being milked, because that's kind of like the time frame that they give them to just kind of like let them go and kind of give them some time off, if you may. So that's kind of like the way that they've maintained the operations of these like dairy farms. And I think, you know, if you wanted to know how many gallons of milk, so usually, for example, Milkin R, which is obviously RUCKS, like this family, each cow produces about 75 pounds of milk in the summer months and around 85 pounds of winter. So about a gallon of milk weighs about 8.6 pounds. So their cows are producing about an average of 9 gallons of milk to feed families just like yours pretty much every day. So that's kind of like the way that I describe that. So that's a really interesting way to like then they kind of put it. In fact, we got to visit the part of it where they keep their calves, where basically, or like the baby cows are growing, and it was really cool to be able to see. And here's an interesting fact too, because there's another part of it that is a massive misconception, which is that cows are separated from their babies and they're giving formula instead of actually getting the milk from their mothers. Here's the problem with like, and this is a part of it that was like mind blowing to me. Just like certain cows, just like mothers sometimes don't have the greatest quality of human milk, like human mothers with their babies, the same thing happens to cows. And sometimes the quality of the milk of a specific cow for their calves is not the best that is going to give them the best nutrition, in which case a lot of times formula must be used. So they live in this environment in which they can actually suckle from this specific machines that mix a specific amount of like it's still bovine milk, it's still milk coming from cows, but it's a formulation that is specifically made for that specific calf, according to whatever their dietary and requirements are. There are literally cow dietitians, like cow nutritionists or agricultural nutritionists, that are in charge of making sure that these animals are actually getting the proper nutrition, not only their calves, but also their mothers. In fact, a lot of times the feed of cows need to be manipulated in order for them not only to yield a higher amount of higher quality milk, but at the same time to keep them healthier. Because again, a lot of times when they're not being fed the proper way, what happens is, like, a lot of times, like, these cows, these dairy cows are not only are not going to produce milk, they're going to become infertile, and a lot of times they may even die. So we even experience like a little tour of like the part where they do mix of feedings, and they give them all kinds of combination from, and I think I have it on here, as far as like how like they're basically fed, but it's essentially they call it a smorgasbord of defined as hay, silage, and grass combined with minerals and local byproducts. The cows have their nutritionists and monitor their diet. They have their personal chef. We bring some feed out to them via kind of like room services, like they kind of explain it. And they wash it down with fresh, clean water, about 30 to 40 gallons a day, to quench their thirst and help them produce freshest, tastiest milk. Now, another big part of it, and just by the way, because a lot of times like some of the stuff that I'm saying here may come off as like, oh, these guys promoting that. No, I'm not promoting anything. I'm just kind of giving you the facts based on a tour that I did of a dairy farm, and I got to see the whole operation. So I'm just literally providing all this information as far as I saw it. The other part too that, we talked as far as like sustainability, and I don't have specific numbers. I was trying to find them. They showed us a video that had a lot of the sustainability practices and how they reduce like kind of carbon emissions and all these different things. But one of like the most interesting parts of it that I saw from their farming practices is that they actually developed technology and use technology to try to, number one, they actually do reclaim water. They use that for things like, for example, cleaning, not cleaning barns, but then they're using reclaimed water, for example, for irrigation of like basically like pastures and lands and stuff like that. But they're obviously using clean water that is coming from rainfall, and they have a lot of not only well water, which obviously they use a small amount, but it's mostly actually they're creating specific ponds that they use to be able to use some of that water towards obviously the needs of like the water needs of the cows on a yearly basis. So essentially what they're doing is trying to, in fact, like, if there's a resource that I highly suggest that you kind of go on to understand a little bit more about water usage and how cows and cattle are not, like beef isn't really a water hog. This is more from this website called like the sacredcow.info, which is an amazing resource for you to kind of understand some of the biggest misconceptions that exist around sustainability in beef and dairy. But one of the things that a lot of times is that a lot of times that people like claim, or I think one of like the biggest like misconceptions is that I think it was like a Meatless Monday like infographic one time that claimed that it takes about 10 bathtubs of water to produce half a quarter pound burger. Again, this is obviously moving into like the beef industry, but really what they were saying is like what the infographic does not disclose is like 90% of the water that is used to make typical beef and 97% of the water used to make grass finished beef. Again, it's not dairy, but it kind of applies in the similar way, is actually naturally occurring rainfall. And what they explain is like there's like 3 different types of what they call like water. So they have like green water that represents natural rain. They have blue water that represents lakes, streams, and underground wells. And then you have obviously the gray water, which is the volume of water required to dilute pollutants. So beef requires about 280 gallons of blue water per pound, which is less than the amount required to produce a pound of avocados, walnuts, or sugar. So when you start to put things comparatively speaking, you actually start actually beef and dairy cows and things like that is not really what they depict it to be. So that's a part of it that a lot of times like people have massive misconceptions. And again, I knew some of this information, but at the same time, seeing this and hear from the farmers, seeing these cows in there, of course, there's still going to be misconceptions and there's still going to be very strong opinions as far as, that shouldn't be something that we should be doing. And there's obviously another things as far as like, all you're drinking from those cows is pus and all this kind of gross conversations that sometimes kind of come into play. All I'm going to tell you from putting my hat as a registered dietitian is, from the nutritional standpoint, milk is an amazing source of nutrients and nutrition for your health. There's nothing to say here that you can't have it because it's going to cause inflammation, it's going to cause this, it's going to cause that. I feel like there's a lot of misconception, and then people can come into me and then kind of slap a study on my face and tell me like, here's where it shows that people that drink dairy have a lot more inflammation, and here's how it shows that. Everybody can do that. I can also shove a study in their faces saying like, this is a study that shows it actually doesn't really help with it, doesn't actually affect inflammation, and there's another study that does that. So it's always kind of like a pissing contest as far as like who can show the research that is most compelling to prove a point that I strongly have opinions about. So that's a problem with people that are polarized in their bias, is sometimes like they will always find the data and the state of data of information that support their notion. So if you're a vegan and you're very opinionated about it, you're always going to find the stuff that is going to show that, and you're going to discard whatever information is showing that it doesn't really support your views or your opinions. And that's obviously a problem. Me as a dietitian, I had to remain, and that's what, and if you would know me, or if you know me, you would know that if you tell me like you're vegan, I'm not going to criticize you. I'm going to be like, awesome, that's great. Like, I'm just going to educate you on if I feel, for example, if you're a client of mine, on how to make sure you do it the proper way. The same thing if you tell me you're following a ketogenic diet or you're doing a carnivore diet, I'm going to tell you what are you missing out on and how are you going to do this if you want to do it the proper way. So those are like the kinds of things that a lot of times, like those misconceptions and research and science, that when we start to look at the dairy industry, the beef industry, and all these different things, sometimes it's so again, like it's just complicated, and a lot of times people don't necessarily see it for what it is. But anyways, that's kind of what I wanted to share here with you guys, because it's a really cool, interesting experience to be able to go to an actual dairy farm and understand really the work that it takes to take care of some of these cows. And again, like it wasn't what you depict to see in documentaries. I had a conversation with Mr. RUCKS talking about, what about that Fairlife documentary that came out on Netflix showing how cows are mistreated, and he was honest, and he said, I literally talked to the person who owns Fairlife Milk, and he takes full responsibility for that. But at the same time, he goes, it's just a lot of times you never know who is in your farm, who is benefiting from that. But that just only showed the view of what the producer, of the people that create documentaries, wanted to show, because it just sells more. This could have been simply a camera of a moment in which a cow was being mounted by another cow, and literally he gave the example, and their cow, like their legs actually completely spread apart. That's something that sometimes happen, and they just kind of show that as a mistreatment and as an act of violence towards the cow, when in reality, they were just basically trying to help the cow heal up the legs and the tendons and the ligaments. So again, like this is the kind of information that a lot of times gets misplaced. And he goes, you never know when an employee, somebody that visits the farm, may take a video of a situation, something that gets completely out of context, and they're being put on a documentary showing a side of the story that is not necessarily true. So that's a part of it that I feel like it was really interesting for me to see, because we all as humans like to believe what really goes well with our values. And if our values are dictating that animals should not be used for this, like we're always going to see the evil side of things whenever we go to a dairy farm, a beef, cattle, all like kind of stuff like this. So it's just really interesting to kind of understand it and see it from different perspectives. Now, as a finish up from the nutritional standpoint of dairy, I just wanted to kind of share some interesting facts. When we start to compare, for example, dairy with almond milk, like cow's milk versus versus almond milk, you're looking at a difference of 12 grams of protein in 1 cup of milk, of cow's milk, versus 1 gram of protein in 1 cup of almond milk. At the same time, you're looking at almost closer to I think calcium has like very similar amounts, but of course, like obviously the fat content of milk can range anywhere between 0 grams to sometimes like up to like 3 to like even 4 and 5 and 6 grams of fat, depending on how much milk solids and milk fats are actually present on the cow and the kind of like the pasteurization process that it kind of goes through. I forgot to mention what happens after the milk after cows are milked. Usually this goes into this massive tanks. Is being picked up on a daily basis, sometimes twice. It goes to processing plants where they're homogenized and pasteurized, which a lot of times like people can go against the whole pasteurization process, but a lot of times you need to understand like there's a lot of risk of you actually drinking raw milk, just so you understand, because sometimes there could be things that could be definitely affecting your health if you decide to do so. But anyways, just wanted to kind of share that stuff with you. But again, hopefully this episode was just kind of like more giving you a different perspective of the way that you kind of start to see dairy. Maybe you're lactose intolerant, and that's something that is a different story. But I feel like a lot of times, like we place things out of context when we don't necessarily understand what we don't see. And being able to visit a farm, which by the way, shout out to like Florida Dairy Milk for allowing us to actually experience this and to be able to see really what these farmers are doing, because they're working very hard to make sure like this happens. Like these are people working 24 hours a day to make sure not only that cows are well taken care of, but at the same time we're getting the best quality of milk ever possible. So yeah, like I think that's part of it that I wanted to come on here and share. Of course, if you have questions about it, you have comments, you have suggestions or anything like that you would love to share, I would love to hear from you. So feel free to shoot me a message to on Instagram. I'm now on TikTok, so you can always go in there and see me doing some fun dances and things like that on there. And I promise you guys that in the future of episodes, I know I said this in the last episode, but I'm going to do my best to bring in fact, I want to bring in Diane, it's her name. She is essentially the owner, or I believe is the owner of Secret.info, Secret Cow, which is essentially a project that is trying to really give and shed light on the reality of what's going on and really like the misconceptions that exist around meat consumption, not necessarily the dairy industry, but it's just like a way that they basically kind of get an idea of really what's the main, everything that is like kind of like behind all of this as far as that. So I think like, Diana, Diana Rogers, she's the director and the producer. She's essentially a dietitian and really wants to kind of get this out there and really show the world really what's the reality behind what's it called? The dairy, not dairy industry, but the beef industry. So definitely stay tuned for a documentary. It's a short film called Soft Slaughter. And geez, I think it's probably going to come out pretty soon, so I believe so. But anyways, thank you guys so much for listening today. I will see you guys on the next episode of Viva Nutrition Radio. Have an amazing week, and see you soon. Hey, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Viva Nutrition Radio. I wanted to ask you a quick favor. If you enjoyed this episode, or if you're enjoying the podcast altogether, make sure you subscribe and leave us a review so we increase our visibility and we continue to reach more people and change their lifestyle through nutrition, performance, fitness, and health. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you guys on the next one.